fourth session, excuse me, of the OD and change paper. So let's quickly jump into the day's program. We will not have a recap like we normally do, but we'll convert that into a quiz. All right. So the whole point of the quiz is not so much to give you marks or any of those things, but to help us generate some discussion so that we can understand what we've been talking about and what we are going to talk about in a little more detail, right? Or clarify any questions or doubts you might have. Excuse me. All right. So, first question. The way I'd like you to kind of respond to this is use the chat feature and type in your choice. Okay. Type in your choice using the chat feature. I'll give you a minute. If the question is not clear, you can type that the question is not clear and I'll clarify it for you. Okay, 3 responses have come in. Can we have the remaining 2 responses as well, please? Okay, 4 have come in. Okay, so everyone has responded 4. All right. Now, this is a sort of a tricky question in the sense that there are more than one seemingly right answer. Okay. And usually in a multiple choice question, when you have seemingly 2 choices that could be the correct answer, you have to choose the better one of the, or the best one among the 4 options. All right. So while it is true that a hammer has a limited number of uses, it is not the best answer. All right. And all right, so we have 2, 3, and 4 up there, which means that the way I framed this question is has done its job. In the sense, the point was to get you to start thinking about it. So let me clarify. When we started off with this hammer, in the first session, one of the things that we were discussing is that for someone who has only a hammer, everything starts looking like a nail, right? So the meaning of that, or the insight in that, is while 4 is technically correct, that a hammer has limited number of uses. It can only nail something down, and with that crowbar feature, you can extract a nail from a piece of wood, but you can't screw a nail, you can't unscrew a nail, You can't hold a nail like you would with a plier. You can't cut a wire like you would with a cutting plier, right? So a hammer has limited number of uses. Uh, One is the opposite of four. It's a very versatile tool, meaning to say it can do everything. It's not like a Swiss knife. All problems can be solved with only one tool. That is the incorrect answer, if at all there is one for this particular question. So by a process of elimination, we end up with knowing the fundamentals will help you in developing tools suitable to solve different problems, right? So that is what I want you to take away from this metaphor of the hammer, which is that I the reason why uh, I end up carrying a hammer with me is if I don't know the fundamentals, right? So if I don't know fundamentally how I need to screw or unscrew a nail, then I'll start using it as a hammer. You probably would have seen a lot of carpenters do that. They will actually hammer a nail, a screw inside, instead of using a screwdriver, right? So the point over here is it's important for us to understand the fundamentals. When you know the fundamentals, then you can design any tool or any method that will help you solve a problem, which is why we've spent actually quite a bit of time with just the background. I haven't really gotten into how do you go about, what is the process of change management. We haven't gone into that yet. We will do that today. The reason why I did not rush into that was because I wanted everyone to have a fundamental understanding. You need to understand the why, what, before we jump into how to do something. All right. So the correct answer for this is 3. So the same logic will apply for the second quiz question, which is you have to choose the best option among the options presented. All right. If there are more than one options that look close enough, you'll have to think and choose the best one. Let's do the second one. Once again, just type in your number. All right, so we have all 5, and everyone has selected 2, which is the quote that we've used, 3 times already. So planned organization change is managing the future from the present, right? There are several reasons why the others are not the appropriate choice. The first one, we need to understand why something is wrong as well, even as we know why something is right. So the first option is that it's an immediate response or a reaction to a fall in quarterly profits, right? So that is not the timeline in the sort of change that we are thinking about when we talk about planned organization change. A response to a fall in quarterly profits, unless you're talking about a series of quarterly profits over the last 1 year, right? So that is cause for concern. But if it is just one quarter, then the kind of change that you would put in place to deal with that will be different from the planned organization change that we are actually going to be discussing and looking at in this particular course. Planned organization change is not necessary when business is booming. Well, that is debatable, and maybe we will address that in a subsequent question. Fourth option does not require top management involvement. That again, is arguable. Maybe we will have a response or answer to that in one of the future questions. Let's go to the third question. Again, choose the best of the four options. Ashish, you'll have to make a choice. Is it one or two? Okay. We need one more person to respond. Okay, in the interest of time, I'll move on. Uh, Ashish's first response is actually an interesting response in the sense that uh, both one and two, looked like the right answers. And like I said earlier, you choose the better one. It is true that organization change is the way in which organizations change over time, and that's uh, a sort of truism. But the organization change that we are concerned about in this particular program, in this particular course, is that it is the planned alteration of organizational components to improve effectiveness of the organization. The third one is just I threw in there because I couldn't think of another option. And the fourth one, it is not a set of ad hoc actions because it is a planned set of actions, right? So it's the opposite of two. So the correct response over here is two. Okay, let's go to the fourth one. Okay, so in terms of recall, we seem to be doing really well. This is indeed the McKinsey's 7S framework of an organization. The other three are basically wrong. Michael Porter did not have a seven forces model. He only has a five forces model of uh, rivalry in the industry, so competitive forces. CK Prahlad did not have a fortune at the center of the organization model. It was actually fortune at the bottom of the pyramid model. And Peter Drucker's model is a little more, what do you say, complex to be captured uh, in this particular image. All right. So, do you folks have any questions after when we are discussing a particular response? If you want to add something, or if you have further questions that you want to clarify, just unmute yourself and you can share. Shall we move on? Okay. Thank you. Here's a next question on the same 7S framework. Once again, choose the best response. Okay, so everyone has chosen 4. Because 4 seems to capture both 2 and 3, and 2 and 3 are wordy enough to basically describe what the 7S framework is. 1 is not the right choice for the simple reason that while it may be an incomplete model of an organization because it does not capture external relationships, right? So this is all the structure or the components within the organization and not outside the organization. So you're not talking about other stakeholders like customers, vendors, government, and so on. So in that sense, it is an incomplete model of an organization, but it is not true to say it is not useful, right? So it is useful to the extent that it can help you understand the internal organization of an organization. And 2 and 3 are kind of fairly self-descriptory. So in this particular case, 2 in itself is the right is a good answer. 3 is also a good answer, but the best one would be 4. All right, so good to all of you on that. Let's go to question 6. So we are waiting for one more person to respond. Ashish. Is Ashish around? It is indeed tricky, Ashish. It is indeed tricky. Okay. All right, just go ahead and make a choice. We'll only one response, my friend, not 2. Okay, 3. All right, so we have an overwhelming majority saying 3 and Abhay who's saying 6. So let's hear from Abhay. Abhay, why did you choose 6 and not 3 like everyone else or any of the other options? What was your thinking?
Because organizations have a different set of thinkings or leadership. So if they are reactive, they are choosing 1. If they are looking towards a better future, they are having 2. So if they are I mean to say, if it is a forward-looking organization, they will always choose 2. But if they are reactive sense, in my sense, if they are having some certain reaction due to the results, then they are going for 1 only. So it depends upon the type of organizations.
Okay. Would someone who chose 3 respond to Ashish? I mean, like, what was your thinking? Why did you choose 3 and not 6?
Sir, Ajay. Okay.
Okay, Ajay,
Thank
go
you,
ahead, go
Ashish, for your response.
ahead.
I just want someone who chose 3 to,
Yeah, Ajay here, sir.
not Ashish, Abhay. So thank you,
Ajay.
Abhay. So could someone who chose 3?
Yes, sir. Ajay Kumar Shukla here, sir. Ajay Kumar Shukla.
Ajay, please tell us.
So I have chosen 3 because it depends on the organization, as rightly Abhay sir told. But the thing is that if at all the organization is looking for a short term kind of a thing, near term economic improvement, that is what is the goal, he has to change. He has to bring a change in the organization to improve the quality or capability of the people, so that that kind of change will be brought in and that kind of economical improvement can be done. So for that matter, the organization will have to change. Okay, on the other hand, the first option, reaction to the adversity in the present to prepare for the future or based on the learning from the past. So even if we see today's scenario, COVID scenario, we have seen that most of the businesses are going down or not working well, but now they are now thinking of preparing for the past. So if this thing had been done bit earlier, which now the companies are going to the digital platform, coming on a digital way of promoting the things and getting the businesses online, doctors going to see the patients online, all these things were present earlier also, but the change was not there. So now this adversity has brought in a necessary change to be adapted, and people have to change now. So both the things are required. So both one and two are the causes of changes, and the organization need to change as per that. That's what is my thinking.
Okay. Actually, thank you, Ajay, and thank you, Abhay. Both of you had good points to make. The only difference between 3 and 6 as our choices is in the grammar, whether it is 1 and 2 or 1 or 2. All right. If you recall our discussion on why organizations change, point number 1 and point number 2 were two different ways of understanding the question of why organizations change. One perspective is what Beer and Noria say in theory O and theory E and theory O, which is point number 2. And the other one is a more just a logical reasoning set of reasons, which is that it's a reaction to adversity, preparing for the future, and learning from the past. So all 5 points 1 and 2, all the 5 different aspects are ways in which to understand or explain why organizations change. So for that reason, uh, point number 3 is the best option among the 6 options that we have on the screen. All right. So thank you to the two who shared your thoughts. Let's go to question 7. We are waiting for Deepak. Okay, 2. So this is a question that we looked at actually last week, and we did discuss the different points. Uh, when organizations can change, well, they can change at any of these points, but in terms of ensuring that you always retain your competitive edge or advantage, uh, you want to be able to change at B, which is 2 in your answer choice. B is the best among the 5 options. A is too soon. C is better late than never. D and E are actually like, well, this is too. It's good. D is good. C and D are going to be much harder. E is really, is going to be, you need a miracle of sorts to uh, pick up from there. But there are organizations that have been able to pull themselves and out of the rut and do exceedingly well. In fact, Apple was one of those, is actually a good example of that. Until when Steve Jobs was thrown out, Apple stagnated for a long time. I mean, they were in really, really deep trouble, dire straits. And when they brought Steve Jobs back, and then he went on to launch the iPod. When he launched the iPod, is when Apple kickstarted its entire revolution. I mean, like transformation of sorts. And now it's, I believe it is among the top two most valuable companies in terms of market share, not market share, sorry, in terms of market capital. All right, so the right answer over here is 2 at point B. All right, so let's go to the next question.
Ted, I have a question.
Yes.
Yeah. So we mentioned, yes, B is the right time to change because still we are in the game and still the curve is moving
Your
up.
voice is breaking a little bit, Deepak. Could you?
Yeah, is it okay now? Maybe the
Yeah,
next
it's
row.
slightly better. I hope the others can hear what Deepak is saying as well. Go ahead, Deepak.
Okay, so I was saying we know so companies should change, go for change when they are moving up the ladder. But how would companies know that this is the right time and still, so like A, the curve is going up, B, still curve is going up. How would they know this is the right time and this is now we have reached to point B, we are not still at point A or maybe not towards moving to point C? How do they recognize this?
That's actually a great question, and we did discuss this where we said that at B, when you're doing really well, there are two things that are happening. One, you don't know that C is going to happen, which is that you're very close to reaching the plateau. You don't know that. And B is also a time when, because you're doing really well, you are not going to be able to get the kind of support in the organization where people will say, yes, we want to change. So B is a hard thing to pinpoint in practice. But from a conceptual standpoint, what this particular chart is trying to say is you have to be willing and ready to change when you're actually doing well, right?
Okay.
And to help us in this, I had posted a very small tool called the corporate cholesterol test. I also posted I shared the article also from which that particular slide was taken. I'm sorry, I don't have that with me today as a slide, but do you recall that corporate cholesterol test? It was a set of 12 questions that you can, share with your team members, which helps you, you know, determine to some extent whether there is a need for change in your organization. Do you remember that particular test?
So, was it to do with how do you react to change thing?
No, so just
No.
like give me a second. Let me pull that up for you. Can you see this?
Yes, yeah.
This was a tool I had shared, last couple of sessions. So use this as a simple questionnaire to get a sense of whether your organization needs to change, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is, I mean, the question that you asked is very valid in the sense it is going to be difficult to know exactly when it is to change. which is why uh, this particular test will help us, give us a better sense of when to change. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So
Thank you.
let's
And
move on to
I'll quickly tell you the reason why did I ask this question. So I was relating it with cricket. Let's say team
Sure.
is playing well, and then you are deciding, okay, who will go, who will open, and then who will go at number 2 or number 3. If it's going fine, you don't know who will be out of form, and you might not want to change the equation because that might not work. So similarly, in the organization, if it's going up, if you change the equation, it may not work. So how organizations would know, okay, this is the time to change. So that's why I asked this question.
Okay, so one way in which organizations deal with this question, right, of when should an organization change, is by uh, inculcating in their culture itself that they have to be continuously looking for change, right? So it becomes
Yeah,
part of the culture that change is going to be a given. So, for example, I gave the example of the company 3M in one of the sessions, where because they're a retail company, they make products at retail. Uh, they have a rule that up to 25% of their revenues every year has to come from products that were developed in the last, I think, 12 months or 18 months, right? So what that does is it creates a culture where people have to keep innovating. They have to keep creating and innovating, finding new uses for the products that they make, or create new products to meet customer demand. So that creates a culture within the organization to be ready for change. So no one is complacent. No one is complacent. uh, so those people who work in the IT industry, you probably know that they work on different versions, like version 2.1, 2.11, 2.3. So meaning to say, you're expected to update things uh, in a very rapid uh, time frame. You're not like, say, uh, a car company probably will hold a model for about 10 years, 10 to 12 years. They might keep varying, tinkering a little bit every year with as they bring out every year's models, but the fundamental design or the chassis will remain for at least about 10 years. In the software industry, you see people, I mean, like, things change much more rapidly. You'll have version 7, and then after 2 months you have version 10, right? So it all depends on if you are able to uh, inculcate or allow this culture of change uh, to be part of the DNA of the organization. Okay.
yeah.
Okay, so let's move to question number 8. Can we have the others respond too? Okay, so we have 4 responses. It seems like some of you may be having network issues. Hopefully you can catch up when things smoothen out. So the responses are 4 and 3. Option 4 says both 2 and 3. In this particular case, 2 is actually not the right answer. 3 is the right answer over here, which is, it is an equation first developed by David Gleicher to assess the readiness of an organization to change. It is not the exact time when an organization should change. That is something that we just discussed earlier. We said it's harder to do that, and we only have a little test that we can do. But this equation concerns more with the readiness, whether conditions within an organization are in place for the organization to change. So related to question 8 is question number 9. Choose the best option. Okay, this seems to be a fairly straightforward one. What this equation basically says, it helps you kind of understand whether your organization is ready for change. It's well and good to say, yes, we need to change, and there is a great need for change. But if the internal systems and the people are not ready for change, then that is not going to work out. So just a quick description of each of these letters. C stands for change. That is, for change to take place, the product of D, V, and F, that is the dissatisfaction with the status quo, that some people have to be unhappy with the current state of affairs, into the availability of a clear vision, into the availability of the first steps that your organization will take towards the vision. All 3 of them have to be in place before change can take place. Even if one of them is missing, then the organization is not going to be ready. And this product has to be greater than R, or the resistance to change, or the cost of change, right? So yes, I want to change, but if the manner in which you have to go about changing it is going to be more expensive than the change itself or the fruits of the change, then resistance is going to be higher and change is not going to happen. All right. So this again is a useful tool in your toolkit uh, of trying to, this goes along with the earlier one of when to change. You do the corporate cholesterol test to assess whether your organization, whether it is time for your organization to change. And then once you determine whether it is, yes, it is a time to change, then you ask the next question, am I ready for change? Is the organization ready for change? And change will only happen if D, V, and F are greater than R. R meaning the resistance to change or the cost of change itself. Options 2 and 3 are meaningless in this after the description of option 1. Let's look at the next question. It's a simple true or false question. Okay, so that is true. This is basically the definition from one of the slides. Uh, there are numerous ways in which organization culture can be defined, but the one we've chosen is from Ed Schein, which basically says that organization culture is the taken for granted assumptions that an organization has come to, has made it part of its DNA in the process of trying to solve certain problems over time, right? So as problems have solved their, as companies, organizations have solved their problems, they have learned lessons from those resolutions. And then when those solutions are seen as valid, then they are transmitted to other people and over several generations within that particular organization. And over time, that gets crystallized as the culture of the organization. So in this particular case, the correct answer is true. Let's do one more. This is also a culture related question. All right, so the correct answer is 3, like all of you have stated. I've just jumbled up the different levels and sees the correct sequence of the levels. So this is from Ed Schein's uh, 3 levels of organization culture, which is artifacts, that is what is visible, espoused beliefs and values, what the organization says about itself, and underlying assumptions, that is the basic values that drive the actions of the organization. So this is from, again, organization culture, from the levels of culture discussion that we had last week. All right, so one last question. So there are 6 formal organization structure types that we looked at last week. This is going to be a little bit trickier in terms of recalling, but see if you can get as many as you can. A, B, C, D, E, F. Just type it like A, what is this type of structure called? B, what is this type of structure called? C, and so on until F. What are the different types of formal organization structures we discussed last week? Don't overthink it. Whatever comes to your mind, go ahead and type it out and we can discuss it. Okay, Abhay has started off. The others can chime in as well. Even if you don't remember all of them, that is fine. That's fine. Ashish says no clue, sorry. So I'm kind of assuming the others are also part of. So Deepak says, I missed this part in the last session. All right, so that's a good excuse. But okay, I understand all of you are working students, so it's going to be a little difficult to catch up on this particular thing. All right, so one of the things that you may want to do as part of the learning process is to just review the slides 5 or 10 minutes before each session, right? So that way you are up to speed and you know what happened last week, and you're ready for today's session as well. So to cut the pain a little quickly over here, let me just unmask these different types of structures. Again, if you recall our discussion last week, we said these are ideal organization types, right? So ideal organization types, your particular organization can slightly vary from this, but what you basically see is that you have organizations that are structured along functional lines on the one end, and then you have organizations that are structured along project lines, and in between all the mixes and matches form the other types of organization structures. You have anything from the functional matrix, the balance matrix, or the project matrix. The basic idea is simply this: which part of the organization has control, or who has control? In the functional structure, the functional heads have control. In the project-based organization, the project heads have control. In the other intermediary structures, there is a little bit of sharing of power, right? So in the functional matrix, the functional heads have more power than the project heads. In the balanced matrix, the functional head still has a little more, maybe 60% more power, 60% power, and projects have 40%. In the project matrix, both the functional and the project heads have equal power. In the project-led organization, project heads have more power of the functional heads, right? So this is just a way to conceptually understand how organizations can be structured or are structured. So when you are thinking about organization change, if your plan is to go from functional to project, that is going to be a much deeper and a much larger and deeper gorge to kind of leap over, versus going just from functional to functional matrix, So A to B is going to be relatively easier than going from A to F. Okay, so that was the lesson from this particular slide. Okay, so we are done with the quiz. So let's, we have about half an hour, and let me try and do something new today. Just a quick recap. What we've looked at is we've looked at everything from the definition all the way to organization structure. Last week, we also looked at one other aspect, which is about individual change. We look at that in a little more detail today. All right. So I hope all of you are clear, or at least somewhat clear, about the fundamentals of organization change. That is, what is the definition? What are the different components that need to change in an organization? Why organizations should change? When they should change? What are the types of organization change? Whether the organization is ready to change, and aspects of organization culture and structure that we need to know before we embark on change. So yes, last week we did a little bit of this, which is, we said for organizations to change, individuals will have to change, right? Because at the end of the day, it is the people who will have to drive any particular change. Even if you talk about the introduction of a new technology, people will have to change to use the technology that has been installed in the organization. If a new piece of machinery has come in, people will have to be trained to use the machinery that comes in. Okay, so no change is going to happen without individuals in the organization changing. So this is a slide we looked at last week, which basically says that for individual, change has to occur at 3 levels: cognition, behavior, and attitudes. Meaning to say that for an individual to change, let me take myself as an example. If I want to change, I have to start changing the way I think. I have to change the behaviors that I engage in. And I also have to change the attitudes that I have towards something. So for example, let's take COVID. COVID happened March last week. There was a lockdown. The whole country shut down. Now suddenly I need to buy groceries. What do I do? Well, groceries was in the exempt list of things that will be open. So I was able to easily get groceries. But I couldn't go and buy an electronic equipment because that was not considered a necessity. So I had to change my behavior. So if I needed an electronic equipment, I just had to wait until the lockdown was lifted after 21 days. So I had to change my behavior. Cognition. So I go learn about COVID. What is this COVID? What is this coronavirus? Is it new? Why is it called novel coronavirus? What types of coronaviruses exist? What is the way in which this coronavirus kind of is transmitted? Right. So once I learn about those things, it reinforces the behaviors of washing hands, keeping distance, wearing a mask, not touching my hands and face. Then over time, I change my attitude towards safety, towards health, towards hygiene, right? So the behavior that started off as a response to COVID, which is to wash my hands frequently, now has become a larger attitudinal change towards personal safety and hygiene and public safety and hygiene as well, right? So this is what we say about change happening at three levels. Behavior is the easiest to change. Learning, cognition, understanding takes a little more time. Attitudinal change takes a longer time, implying that if you want to change someone, you start with the behavior, then go to cognition, and then go to attitudes and values, right? So this is where we stopped last week. No, we did that, and we did the response to change, which we will look at in a little bit. The primary objective of individual change is to reduce resistance to change and increase readiness to change. And I briefly mentioned that there is a model that is available for affecting individual change. We look at that particular model in a little more detail today. All right, so you probably remember this particular typology of how people react to change. We used these animals as memory aids to help us remember and also describe the different ways in which people can change, right? So we have the turtle, the hawk, the lion, the deer, and the elephant. The what you say, the intent was, it's easier for us to remember these animals, and once you remember the animals, you can associate certain types of behaviors to those particular animals, and that will help you, understand where someone is coming from. So there was a question last week about I forget who asked that particular question, but the question, if I recall correctly, was that well, there is this boss who asks us to give suggestions uh, and solutions, but when we offer suggestions and solutions, goes ahead and dismisses it and doesn't use that at all, right? So, and where would you slot someone like that into these five animal typology of reactions to change? That was a good question. And so there are limitations to this particular five animal framework, but what it also does, it is gives you an opportunity, right? So if you find a reaction type that is not fully captured in any of these five animals, then you can choose another animal, right? So you can add to this, you know, think of which animal would best capture that kind of idea, and then put it there, maybe a jackal or a coyote or a wolf, or any other animal, maybe an owl. uh, think of an animal, a monkey, a crow, uh, any animal, any bird that you think captures that little variance that is not available in these five animals. Please feel free to do that. That is the whole point of this program. The reason why we talk about the hammer is, if we understand the fundamental concepts, then we can modify the tools that we already have, or we can create new tools ourselves. Okay, so this is something we looked at last week. We also said there are positives and shortcomings for each type of reaction to change. Uh, and each of them has a contribution to make. So, as a change leader, you'll have to be aware of it. That while someone who reacts like the turtle uh, contributes calm and quiet and patience, but this person can also seem to be uncommitted. So as a leader, I'll have to work on that particular person to ensure that I get their commitment for the change process, right? So similarly, that logic you'll have to apply for the other reaction types as well. Okay, so this is where we stopped off last week. So let's look at Kurt Lewin's model in a little more detail today, right? So again, you see the toolbox in the top right-hand corner, which is to give you an indication that this is a tool that you can use as part of your change efforts, and a tool that you put in your toolkit. All right. So there are three basic stages that Kurt Lewin conceptualized when he was thinking about individual change. So as a psychologist, Kurt Lewin was more interested in individual change. But once you understand this particular model, you can see that you can actually apply it at the organization level as well, right? So the unit of analysis can move from individual to group or to organization with some modifications. This model itself, seemingly deceptive, it only has 3 stages, but it's a very elegant model. You know, if we understand this, affecting organization change becomes fairly easy because it helps you cut clutter, to say. What it basically says is this: individuals, and with some caveats and extending it to organizations, are in a particular state which has crystallized because of the duration that they have spent uh, in a particular state or in the organization, right? So if you want to bring about any change, the old ways of doing things or the current ways of doing things need to be dismantled, right? So he sees individual personality or individual organization culture as something that is frozen in, like, it's crystallized and it's frozen, so it exists at a particular point in time. Before I can go and do any change to it, I have to first unfreeze it, right? So I need to thaw it so that I can then start making the change, because it is difficult to initiate any change or make any change to something that is solidified, right? So conceptually, think of it as like a cube of ice. You know, when it is solid, there's nothing much you can do in that. You know, you can't make orange juice out of it, or you can't make any kind of uh, anything out of it. An ice cube remains as an ice cube. But once you thaw it, you can add flavor to it. That is, you change it, and then you can refreeze it. Now it becomes an ice cream, right? At least an ice candy. So if you think of the ice cube, you unfreeze the ice cube, you add the new flavor to it, mix it properly, and then you refreeze the new state. You go from plain ice cube to an orange flavored, mango flavored, or whatever flavored ice candy in 3 stages. Similarly, with the individual, you unfreeze, we will look at how you do that, how you change, and also how you refreeze. Let's look at each of these stages in a little more detail. First thing, unfreezing the old. There are 2 aspects to this. One is you have to create the motivation or the need to change, right? So if you remember David Gleicher's formula for change equals the product of D, V, and F. D is dissatisfaction with the status quo, right? Dissatisfaction simply means that you have to be unhappy. That unhappiness drives the motivation or the need for change. Now, in unfreezing, you have to do 2 things. One is you have to create the need for change and also create the psychological safety to reduce anxiety that people might have to change, right? Because change is is not easy. It's hard, and people have various reactions to it, like we just saw recently. The 5 different animal types. They have various reactions to it. So while you have to work on creating the need for change, you also have to provide or create a psychological safety net that will help reduce the anxiety people have about change. So let's look at the first one. In order to create this motivation for change, one, the status quo needs to be disconfirmed, which is basically you're saying that uh, whatever exists is not good enough. Whatever exists is not good enough. All right. So Ashish says change is the only constant, as they say. All right. So that particular phrase that you're referring to, Ashish, change is the only constant. What that basically means is this: that when we talk about the world, what you can be sure of is that the world is constantly changing. So, so it is meant in that way, that change is always happening. Okay. But the way we are seeing it over here is that there are times when organizations tend to stagnate. You will see that within your organization. After the organization is doing exceedingly well, they get too caught up on their own success. They don't innovate. They don't introduce new products. They don't explore new markets, new customers. They don't make any improvement to what they're offering. So what happens is, when there is a competitor who offers something better, customers will start going to the new offer, the new supplier, right? So the new company that's offering these new or improved products. So in that state, what it basically excellent, Nokia and BlackBerry, they totally blew the ball on trying to anticipate the impact of touch interface that Apple brought in. I mean, the iPhone was not the first touchscreen interface. There were companies that did it earlier. I remember LG had a model, Sony had a model, but the ease of use that was there in the iPhone, supported by their app store, right? So the whole value proposition of the iPhone was that, if I recall correctly, in 2007, when the iPhone was introduced, the slogan was, there's an app for it. So whatever you want to do, there is an app for it. Okay. So status quo needs to be disconfirmed. And the second aspect to creating motivation for change is that survival anxiety must exceed learning anxiety. This is a really important point in the unfreezing stage. What this basically says is this: my need for survival should exceed any anxiety or apprehension I might have about learning something. So, for example, uh, let's take my field of consulting. Okay. So, before this lockdown happened, a lot of my consulting was in face-to-face programs, in workshops and seminars, you know, meeting clients in their workplace. Once the lockdown happened, when all of those programs got shut down, I quickly had to transition from offline in-person delivery of programs to online delivery, which means that I should have prepared myself in using all these technologies, or if I was not aware of it, I would have to start learning all these new tools, right? So the need for survival, the need to bring in revenues should be greater than any anxiety that I might have about learning a new technology, or spending some money on getting a professional Zoom subscription, or in better a setup to do online programs, right? So these are two aspects to creating motivation or the need for change. So what are some ways in which you can disconfirm the status quo, or shake the equilibrium, so to speak? Is one is to show the people in your organization the mismatch that is there between uh, what is needed to stay competitive, right? So, hey, I'm doing certain things. Let's take Nokia and BlackBerry because we have that as an example over here. Nokia was great with touch phones and feature phones. BlackBerry had its own ecosystem, right? So they had their own network. Their network was different from the phone networks that Nokia and other phone companies used. BlackBerry, even until its most recent version of the phone, still had an actual keyboard and not a touch keyboard. They were simply unwilling to learn, which is why nobody even talks about BlackBerry. But in 2007 and even up to 2008, if I remember, I mean, BlackBerry was the rage in the corporate sector. Pretty much everyone had a BlackBerry, right? So you show the company, show the people that there is a great mismatch between the current capabilities or state of the organization and what is required in the market. Highlight dissatisfaction with the job, with the goal, anything that can unsettle people. uh, if that doesn't work, use threats, in an ethic as a threats, as long as they're legal. There is the famous Hindi saying that says uh, laton ke bhoot baaton se nahi mante. So basically to say that, when all else fails, use a little threat, legal, political, technological, moral, in order to unsettle people so that they start feeling the need for change. Next step, ensure that the need for survival is greater than the need for any resistance they might have for learning. So address their fears, their sense of incompetence, loss of identity, loss of membership. Uh, Try and deal with excuses that are given where people deny, uh, or starts bargaining or scapegoating. I remember back in the day when computers were first introduced in companies, right? There were great resistance from the trade unions who, would say things like, well, one computer will leave 20 people unemployed. What will all the 20 people do? Right? So this great resistance to learning or allowing the introduction of computers. But now we take computers for granted. A similar logic will happen for everything. Any new technology is always seen as a threat, right? So recently there was an article in the BBC, or not, sorry, BBC, in Nature, the science magazine, science journal, which talked about the use of artificial intelligence, AI, to predict the crystal structure of molecules, of viruses, basically, and of, sorry, not viruses, of proteins, right? So the crystal structure of proteins using artificial intelligence. And so one of the points in that particular article was that what used to take days in terms of actual physical tests by crystallographers, molecular crystallographers, now happens within a day or within a few hours, which means AI is going to obviate the need for crystallographers in the near future. So those crystallographers will have to start looking at new things that they can do with their knowledge. Okay, so you create the need for change, and then you provide safety, psychological safety, to reduce learning anxiety. How do you do that? You do that by providing a compelling vision. You probably heard of this story. Uh, it's pretty famous. It refers to a cathedral being built in Europe, but it can mean anything. actually. So there are two guys, both who are breaking stone. Uh, One person says, well, I am just breaking stone. The other person says, I am breaking the stone in order to build this grand temple or grand cathedral or grand, structure. So the way in which these two people perceive their work comes from the leader's ability to provide a compelling vision, right? So that can energize people and provide psychological safety, and they'll be open to learning new things. Provide formal training, give training so that people feel a little more competent, and with competence comes confidence. Provide coaches, provide feedback, help people, feel a sense of safety psychologically, have some positive role models in the organization, create support groups where people can reach out and learn things from, uh, and also establish consistent systems and structures. Okay, so all of these things will help in the unfreezing stage, right? So unfreezing basically means that the ice cube is has to be thawed. You thaw the ice cream by taking the ice cube out of the freezer and keeping it outside, right? So keeping it outside is adding that extra temperature that is going to start melting the ice. The addition of temperature, the movement of the ice cube from the freezer to the outside is what these two things are doing, which is creating the need for change and psychological safety to reduce anxiety. So the second stage, okay, so before we go to the second stage, at this first stage, you know, when you start adding additional temperature to the ice or the people, that's going to unsettle people. It's going to make people uncomfortable. It's going to make people uncomfortable, and they will react to that particular change. We've looked at one set of individual responses to change, which is the framework developed by Heather Wishick. And like we said earlier, you can add more animals or birds to this if you think they better describe a certain variation in the responses that you are seeing in your organization. Another useful set is using Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's 5 stages framework. Now, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross was a psychiatrist who basically developed this 5 stages framework to uh, identify the different stages in which the different stages people undergo when they are dealing with a terminal illness, right? So that is the origin of this 5 stages framework. uh, so when I am told I have a terminal illness, whatever the terminal illness is, pancreatic cancer, let's take for example, how do I respond to that when I suddenly hear the news? There is shock, and then there is denial. I'm saying, no, this cannot be true. So I start doing multiple tests. I go to multiple doctors. I get a second opinion. I get a third opinion. And then after a while, when all those tests start confirming one after the other that I do have this illness, I'm in anger. You know, I'm angry at God. I'm angry at everything. I'm angry at my family. I'm angry at things that I've done myself. The next stage after that is bargaining. I say, okay, you start praying and you say, like, hey, if you heal me, I'll go to Tirupati and break 1,000 coconuts, or I'll feed 1,000 people, or I will change the way I live. I will make amends, whatever. I bargain. When that also doesn't work, I go into depression. I'm like, all is lost. There's no point in living. And then after that, I get to a stage of acceptance. So uh, these are the 5 stages that Elizabeth Kubler-Ross identified as the stages that people who are facing a terminal illness undergo. Now, in organizations also, when there is a change initiative, a dramatic change initiative, say something that introduces a completely new technology, where the company location is changed, or there is a merger or an acquisition, people within organizations also go through similar responses. And the reading that you have, assigned reading for this particular course, which is that change management handbook, uh, has a useful checklist, right? So you should check this out. This is towards the end of that particular 36-page article. For each type of response, how will individual employees react, right? So just to give you this one, the individual believes that the problem will correct itself. If I just close my eyes, the problem will go. It's like the turtle response. I withdraw into my shell and hope that all the problems go away. I display apathy, numbness. I try to rationalize. And the manager or the leader, the change manager's response is, talk to them about the business case for the change. Empathize that change will happen, that you feel their pain, that you are also uncertain about your own position as a manager, and provide some time for people's emotions to play out. Okay. So check this out in the reading. What we'll do is we'll stop for now because we are close to 7:30. At this point, I like say if you have any questions, uh, you know, bring them to me next week in the beginning itself, or I'll stick around for a few more minutes after the session. You can ask me your questions. Also, what I'm going to do is I'll be posting this particular slides onto the Google Drive. Uh, Please access the Google Drive folder, download these slides, and review them before you come back to the next session. Today we have a new participant, Mr. Sanjeev Sahani. So if you would like to share with me your email address, preferably a Gmail address, I will send you a link to the Google Drive so that you can access the previous slides as well, right? So the previous slides and some additional materials that I've posted, some case studies that you might find useful for this particular course. This is from Mr. Sanjeev Sahni. Please
Thank
share
you,
with me your email address in the chat box, and
I'll
I'll
do
add
that.
you to the sharing list after the class is done.
Thank you, sir. I'm just doing that.
I'm sorry?
Copied, sir. I'm just doing that.
Okay, I got it. Ashish Sharma. No. Ashish, is this a new email address? Okay, let me just take this email address down. Ashish. Okay, I'm sorry, Ashish, for not adding you. I think I may have gotten a wrong email address for you. Okay, and I've taken Sanjeev Sahni's email as well. Sahni. Is that email address correct, Mr. Sanjeev? Is it 2001 or is it 20? Oh, wow. 200,001. All right. So it is indeed 200,001. Okay. All right. So we are well past our 7:30 time allotted for this particular session. So what I'll do is I will post these slides, access them, review them before you come back to class next week, and then we will wrap up the change management portion next week. Okay. And thank you, Ashish, for your kind words. I look forward to seeing you all next week.
Sir, there is one thing that I wanted to ask. Are you going to discuss about the suggested manager responses also?
Can we do that next week? We'll do that first
Yeah,
thing
yeah,
next
yeah,
week.
yeah, that's what.
Yeah, we will
sure.
discuss.
Thank you. Thank you.
Any questions you have, I'd be happy to discuss them, right?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
All right. All right, folks, take care. Good night to everyone.